A dark cloud hangs over the legal fraternity in eSwatini following the assassination of human rights activist Thulani Maseko. The 52-year-old lawyer and president of pro-democracy Multi-Stakeholder Forum was shot dead at his home in Luyengo, about 45 kilometers from the capital, Mbabane. Maseko's death coincided with a threat by King Mswati III that he would deal with all those calling for democracy. As tensions escalate in the monarchy, we speak to Anneke, the Executive Director of Southern Africa Litigation Centre. Anneke, appreciate your time on the show today.
Thank you.
Certainly a dark cloud. What do we know about what transpired in the killing of Mr. Maseko?
It was definitely an assassination. He was shot on Saturday evening at his home. Someone shot him through the window. His family was still at the house when it happened. So, massive surprise to everyone, because this is not... just because Thulani is such a peaceful person. Someone who's always just asked for democracy, asked for dialogue, believed in working through the courts to try and challenge whatever deficits there are in the country. So, yes, it was a clear assassination. It's not clear who committed it, but there are strong insinuations that it's linked to so-called heat squads within the country.
Are we surprised? Should you be surprised? I mean, if we and I ask this in the context of the human rights records of eSwatini, which are not the best in the world.
In a sense, we shouldn't be surprised. There have been quite a number of assassinations of pro-democracy activists over the years. What makes this... And Thulani was an activist as well as a lawyer. I think what the shock is because he is such a high-profile person, a human rights lawyer that's known throughout the world. And people always thought that, like if you're known, perhaps you're somehow safer. Safe. And I think that's what shocked people.
But King Mswati, 6 hours prior to this unfortunate murder, had stated categorically, according to the papers, that he would deal with any people that were pro-democracy. Yes,
that's why I mean, he's always been threatening that. I think what has become more apparent is that the government has tried to up its methods of dealing with pro-democracy activists, including calling in military experts to train its forces. So there's definitely been an escalation, and a very clear escalation, and a very clear statement by the monarchy that they will no longer tolerate these sort of activism.
So there must be a lot of fear, I'd imagine, in eSwatini at the moment, particularly amongst those of the Fourth Estate.
Absolutely. I think within the Fourth Estate there's been a fear for many, many years already. So it's always been a question of what can you publish, what can you say, what can't you say. That fear has definitely been there. I think the fear was more around what would happen. You could be arrested, your family can be sidelined in terms of access to services, you might be unemployable. I think now the fear is you could be killed, and that's a massive escalation in terms of just the crisis in the country, and it's definitely going to stifle people from saying anything, for sure.
Well, one of the biggest challenges that we find in the African continent is that individuals are oppressed by various regimes, attacked and even killed. We go back to Zimbabwe, I think it was in 2018, where soldiers killed a number of individuals in broad daylight. And despite a commission chaired by former presidents of South Africa, nothing has come of that Atlantic Commission. We also know that head of the SADC Troika at the moment, President Hage Geingob of Namibia, has come out and said that the authorities in eSwatini must deal with this as swiftly as possible. Can we expect a response? Can we expect for it to be dealt with swiftly, as he suggests?
So immediately after Thulani was killed, there was a statement by the government to say that they will investigate and this is outrageous and all of those sort of things. But if the government itself is implicated, you can't actually trust that investigation. And I think that's for us a big concern. I hear your point about Zimbabwe, and this is for us a similar concern in eSwatini, that there's always been this hesitance by SADC and by the AU to actually deal with eSwatini. It doesn't mean they can't, because, for example, when there was a coup in Lesotho, they also had a judicial inquiry through SADC, and it resulted in change. So it's not that they can't do it, but I think there's some sort of hold that the monarchy has over SADC, or perhaps it's just the boys' club and they're not going to break ranks. But that is our real concern, that why is SADC not calling out what is happening?
Well, let's talk about things on the ground in Eswatini at the moment. We understand that there are some tensions that appear to be fueling. Can you give us an update on this?
I mean, there's been tensions for the past year already. I think the sad thing is that there are quite a number of protests in Eswatini. It's just that we don't often see it. It's not covered in the media, partly because of the silencing of the fourth estate. So there has been a lot happening. People have been protesting. There's been an increase in protest, which is why there's also been an increase in the arrest of people for sedition and terrorism, which often is trumped up charges. And I think things will escalate. There's a march to the police headquarters tomorrow by one of the pro-democracy movements to try and deal with the issue of Thulani. And over the weekend, we'll have his memorial service, and there'll be the funeral. And I think, obviously, that's going to raise a lot of attention, because he wasn't just known within the political sector. Everyone knew him. Everyone knew that if there's an issue, if you've been evicted, go to Thulani, because he will support you. So, yeah, I think it's a shock to many people.
So this clarion call that's been made by SADC, has it been echoed by other organizations, other nations in the West that are very, very pro-democracy and pro-human rights?
Yes, there's been a number of statements coming out, and I think that's what makes this slightly different, because people knew Thulani, and he was well known throughout the world. So there have been a number of statements from the embassies that are based in Eswatini, from different governments, especially the Botswana government has come out strongly on this, internationally as well. So I think that's a good sign, except that's not the pressure necessarily that's going to lead to change. It's not enough, basically, yeah.
So what is that pressure? Because obviously we also want to talk about what Thulani was fighting for. What are some of those issues that were at the core of his message?
So Thulani himself has always written about constitutionalism, about democracy, about the gaps within constitutionalism in Eswatini, because it has a progressive constitution, except for the fact that the king is very much absolved from accountability. And still holds a lot of the decision-making within the country. And Thulani has been very critical about that. And many people have often not been that critical because they fear arrest, and you can be arrested if you critique the monarchy in the country. And he has stood up for that. He has been both the applicant and the lawyer in one of the leading cases challenging provisions of the Sedition Act and of the Terrorism Act, where he himself was charged in 2009 after speaking at someone else's funeral. But it's not just been that. He's the lawyer on a case around the refusal to register an LGBT organization. He represents communities who's been part of large-scale evictions by big businesses within the country. He is the person who actually brought the case which challenged the King's abrupt change of the country's name to Eswatini. And it wasn't, the issue wasn't the name change, the issue was how it was done, and that one individual can actually wake up one morning and decide on that. Yeah.
Now, finally, do you feel that the baton has been dropped, or is it figuratively passed on to somebody else who will fight for these causes, who will fight for human rights issues in Eswatini now that he is gone?
So he has inspired many people. He has, I think, younger activists have always learned and looked up to him, and younger lawyers as well. I do know that many lawyers in the country are fearful. There was an attempted assassination in December of a lawyer, for example, who was also doing human rights work. And the human rights lawyers I've been in contact with this weekend, they're basically in hiding or constantly looking over their back. So yes, the baton can be handed over, but I think it's given what happened to Thulani, it's not going to be easy to just come out and be as outspoken as he has, because one can see the consequences of that, and that's a very big worry. My other worry is the lack of international support, really, for human rights organizations, for human rights lawyers, and for the movement in general. These are movements and organizations that work with very little funding. Their cause is not really known throughout the world. So it's very easy for a human rights organization in South Africa to attract funding in comparison with the same organizations in eSwatini. So I think, if anything, the international community needs to provide more support so that there's a stronger movement and a stronger call from the bottom for change.
Now, finally, very quickly, how do we give more coverage to the issues around human rights in eSwatini in particular? Because you have mentioned that there are issues, but they are not covered by the media.
I think it's about telling the human story. I found, for example, in South African newspapers that editors just don't think it's interesting enough to publish. And that's because many countries, people are very insular in their perspective. But I think what we need to realize is that this is a country, and these are people who are actually very much part of our own makeup. They've had the same history. There's no reason not to cover them. They have family ties within South Africa, for example. So to ignore something that's happening so close to us is just, I think, unacceptable. And I think the media should be speaking out on it. I'm not sure how you're going to get them to do more, but I'll leave that to you, Hugo. Yeah.
Anneke, clearly we're meeting on this somber moment, but certainly appreciate you coming onto the show today.
Thank you so much.
And that was Southern African Litigation Centre Executive Director Anneke Meerkottermakes.